The fluorescent lights in Franklin's grocery hummed overhead like tired cicadas as Kenny Rogers pushed his cart down the cereal aisle, squinting at the endless rows of colorful boxes. At 79, shopping had become more of a chore than he remembered from his younger days. Everything seemed louder, brighter, more overwhelming than it used to be. He reached for a box of oatmeal, the same brand he'd been buying for 20 years, when the world suddenly tilted sideways. The first thing he noticed was the strange metallic taste in his mouth, followed by a rushing sound in his ears like distant water. His vision began to narrow, the bright supermarket lights creating halos that danced at the edges of his sight. Kenny gripped the handle of his shopping cart, trying to steady himself, but his legs felt like they were made of cotton. "Sir? Sir, are you all right?" The voice seemed to come from very far away, even though he could sense someone standing close beside him. Kenny tried to respond, tried to say that he was fine, just a little dizzy, but the words wouldn't form. The supermarket floor rushed up to meet him, and everything went dark. When Kenny opened his eyes, he was lying on the cool linoleum floor of aisle 7, surrounded by a small crowd of concerned faces. A young store manager was kneeling beside him, speaking into a cell phone with urgent, professional tones. "Yes, we need an ambulance at Franklin's Grocery on Maple Street. Elderly gentleman, possible cardiac event." But it wasn't the manager or the gathering crowd that caught Kenny's attention. It was the woman sitting on the floor beside him, holding his hand with the gentle firmness of someone who understood crisis. She appeared to be in her 70s, with silver hair that caught the fluorescent light like spun glass, and eyes that were both kind and somehow distant, as if she were seeing something beyond the immediate moment. "You're going to be fine, dear," she said softly, her voice carrying the warm cadence of the Deep South. "Just breathe slowly, in and out. That's right." Kenny tried to focus on her face, noting the way her weathered hands held his with surprising strength. She was wearing a simple floral dress that looked like it had been well cared for over many years. And there was something about her presence that was both comforting and slightly unsettling, as if she knew exactly what to do in this situation, despite the confusion he could see flickering behind her eyes. "Ma'am, the paramedics are on their way," the store manager said, his voice tight with the kind of professional concern that comes from liability training. "You don't need to—" "Hush now," the woman said without looking away from Kenny. "This man needs calm, not chatter." She squeezed Kenny's hand gently. "My name is Rose, dear. Rose Whitman, and you're going to be just fine." Kenny managed a weak smile. "Kenny," he whispered. "Kenny Rogers." Rose's eyes brightened with recognition, but not the starstruck response he sometimes encountered. Instead, she looked at him with the kind of gentle acknowledgement that one might give to an old friend. "Well, Mr. Kenny Rogers, it's very nice to meet you. Now, I want you to listen to my voice and breathe with me. Can you do that?" For the next several minutes, as they waited for the ambulance, Rose sat beside Kenny on the supermarket floor, talking to him in a steady, soothing voice about simple things: the weather, the changing seasons, the way the afternoon light looked through the store windows. Her words weren't particularly profound, but there was something in her manner that was deeply calming, as if she possessed some innate understanding of how to bring peace to a moment of crisis. When the paramedics arrived, Rose stepped back to give them room to work, but she didn't leave. Kenny found himself looking for her face in the crowd as the EMTs checked his vital signs and asked him questions about his medical history. She stood quietly by the bread display, watching with the patient attention of someone who had learned to wait. "Blood pressure's stabilized," one of the paramedics was saying. "Probably vasovagal syncope, a fainting spell brought on by stress or dehydration. We should take you to the hospital for observation, just to be safe." Kenny nodded, still feeling weak and disoriented. As the paramedics prepared to transport him, he caught Rose's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." She smiled and gave him a small wave, her silver hair catching the light like a benediction. At the hospital, Kenny was examined by Dr. Martinez, a competent young physician who ran a series of tests and confirmed the paramedics' assessment. "Your heart looks good, Mr. Rogers. EKG is normal, blood work is fine. Sometimes our bodies just need to reset themselves, especially when we're dehydrated or under stress. Are you taking care of yourself? Eating regularly? Staying hydrated?" Kenny nodded. Though he had to admit that since his wife's death 2 years earlier, he hadn't been as attentive to his daily routines as he should have been. Meals had become sporadic affairs, often forgotten until hunger forced him to grab something quick and convenient. The house felt too big and too quiet without her laughter filling the rooms. "I'll be more careful," Kenny promised. "Good. I want you to take it easy for the next few days. And if you experience any more fainting spells, come back immediately." Dr. Martinez paused, studying Kenny's chart. "Is there someone who can stay with you tonight? Family or a friend?" Kenny thought about his children, all grown with families of their own, living in different states and busy with their own lives. He could call one of them, but he hated the idea of worrying them over what was probably nothing more than an old man's carelessness. "I'll be fine," he said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. 3 hours later, Kenny was discharged with instructions to rest and follow up with his primary care physician. The hospital arranged for a taxi to take him back to Franklin's grocery to pick up his car, and as they pulled into the parking lot, Kenny was surprised to see a familiar figure sitting on a bench near the store entrance. Rose Whitman was still there, her small purse clutched in her lap, looking for all the world as if she had been waiting for him to return. Kenny paid the taxi driver and walked slowly toward the bench, still feeling a bit unsteady. "Rose, what are you doing here?" She looked up with that same gentle smile he remembered from the store floor. "I was waiting for you, dear. I wanted to make sure you were all right." "You've been waiting here for 3 hours." "Oh, time passes differently when you're my age," she said with a soft laugh. "Besides, I had a feeling you might need someone to talk to." Kenny sat down beside her on the bench, grateful for the company and puzzled by her kindness. "That's very thoughtful of you, but you didn't need to wait. I'm fine, really." Rose studied his face with the kind of careful attention that suggested she was seeing more than he was revealing. "Are you, though? Fine, I mean." The simple question hit Kenny with unexpected force. When was the last time someone had asked him that and actually wanted to hear the answer? "I suppose I am. The doctor said it was just a fainting spell." "I'm not talking about your body, dear. I'm talking about your heart." Kenny felt something shift inside him, a loosening of the careful composure he'd maintained since his wife's death. There was something about Rose's presence that invited honesty, that made it safe to acknowledge the loneliness he'd been carrying like a stone in his chest. "My wife died 2 years ago," he said quietly. "Some days I'm fine. And other days, well, other days I forget to eat because the kitchen feels too empty without her puttering around in it." Rose nodded with the understanding that comes from personal experience. Grief is a strange companion, isn't it? It comes and goes like weather, and some days it hits you when you least expect it. "Did you lose someone too?" Rose was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on her purse. "I lost my Harold 6 years ago. 47 years of marriage, and then one morning he just didn't wake up. Heart attack in his sleep." She paused, looking out across the parking lot. "But lately I find myself losing him all over again, in different ways." Something in her voice made Kenny look at her more carefully. "What do you mean?" Rose turned to face him, and for the first time Kenny saw the confusion and fear that had been hiding behind her calm demeanor. "I have Alzheimer's disease, Mr. Rogers. Early stages, but progressing. Some days I remember everything perfectly. Harold's laugh, the way he liked his coffee, the song we danced to at our wedding. Other days," she shrugged with heartbreaking acceptance. "Other days I can't remember what I had for breakfast, or where I put my keys, or sometimes even where I am." Kenny felt his chest tighten, but not with the physical distress he'd experienced in the grocery store. This was emotional pain, the recognition of someone facing a battle that couldn't be won. "Rose, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry, dear. That's not why I'm telling you." She reached over and patted his hand. "I'm telling you because today, when I saw you fall in that store, something very clear happened in my mind. All the fog lifted, and I knew exactly what to do. I knew how to help you, how to keep you calm until the paramedics arrived. For those few minutes, I felt like myself again. Like the person I used to be before this disease started taking pieces of me away." Kenny was beginning to understand. "You stayed because I wanted to thank you," Rose finished. "For giving me the chance to be useful again, to be the person who helps instead of the person who needs help. Do you know how precious that is when you're losing yourself bit by bit? They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Kenny found himself thinking about the strange synchronicity of their meeting, how his moment of physical crisis had somehow provided Rose with a moment of mental clarity and purpose. "Rose, can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear." "What did you do before you retired? What was your profession?" Rose's face lit up with the kind of pride that comes from a life well lived. "I was a nurse for 42 years. Worked in emergency rooms mostly, but also did some home health care for elderly patients. Harold used to joke that I could diagnose someone's problem just by looking at them walk through the door." Kenny felt a chill of recognition. "You're a nurse?" "Was a nurse," Rose corrected gently. "The Alzheimer's took that away from me about 2 years ago. I couldn't remember medications, couldn't trust myself with patient care. It was one of the hardest things I ever had to do, giving up my license. But today, in the store? Today, for a few minutes, I remembered who I was. I remembered how to help someone in crisis, how to keep them calm and stable. It was like muscle memory, deeper than the disease can reach." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "You gave me that gift, Mr. Rogers. You gave me back myself, even if it was just for a little while." Kenny felt his own eyes welling up. Here was this woman facing the gradual loss of everything that made her who she was, and she was thanking him for fainting in a grocery store. The irony was almost overwhelming. "Rose, I think you've got it backwards. You're the one who helped me." "We helped each other," she said simply. "That's how these things work sometimes." As they continued talking, Kenny learned more about Rose's situation. She lived alone in a small apartment across town, having sold the house she'd shared with Harold when the maintenance became too much for her to handle. Her daughter lived in California and called every week, but Rose was determined to maintain her independence for as long as possible. "The hardest part isn't forgetting things," Rose explained. "It's the in-between times, when you're aware that you're forgetting but you can't stop it from happening. It's like watching yourself disappear in slow motion." Kenny thought about his own struggles with loneliness and purposelessness since his wife's death. While his mind was intact, he understood something about feeling disconnected from the person he used to be. "Do you have help? Someone who checks on you?" "There's a visiting nurse who comes twice a week, and I have a neighbor who looks in on me. But mostly, I'm trying to hold on to my dignity for as long as I can." Rose smiled sadly. "I know that won't be forever, but for now, I'm still me most of the time." An idea began forming in Kenny's mind, something that felt both spontaneous and inevitable. "Rose, I have a proposition for you." She looked at him with curiosity. "I live in a big house that feels too empty these days. You live alone and are facing challenges that are only going to get more difficult. What if—" Kenny paused, making sure he was thinking clearly. "What if we helped each other? Not in any formal way, but just as friends who understand what the other is going through." Rose was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. "What are you suggesting exactly?" "I'm suggesting that maybe we don't have to face our challenges alone. You could come to dinner sometimes, or I could take you grocery shopping. We could look out for each other." Kenny found himself warming to the idea as he spoke. "You have medical knowledge that could be helpful to someone my age, and I have a good kitchen and too much quiet time." "Mr. Rogers, that's very kind, but I couldn't impose—" "It wouldn't be imposing," Kenny interrupted gently. "It would be friendship, and right now I think we could both use a friend." Rose studied his face, looking for signs of pity or obligation and finding only genuine warmth. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you're someone who helped a stranger when he needed it most. I know you're facing something incredibly difficult with grace and courage, and I know that we found each other today for a reason." Over the next hour, as the sun set behind the grocery store and the parking lot gradually emptied, Kenny and Rose talked about practical matters and deeper concerns. They discovered shared interests. Both loved old movies and classical music. Both had complicated relationships with their adult children. Both struggled with the transition from being needed to feeling superfluous. By the time they parted ways, they had made tentative plans for Rose to come to dinner the following Sunday. Kenny would pick her up, and she would help him prepare a meal that would feed them both properly, something they had both been neglecting in their solitary lives. That Sunday dinner became a weekly tradition that stretched into months. Rose proved to be an excellent cook when her memory was clear, and even on her confused days, she could still guide Kenny through familiar recipes, with the muscle memory of decades spent feeding her family. For Kenny, these dinners provided structure and purpose to his weeks. He found himself looking forward to Rose's visits, planning menus and shopping with more care than he had shown for his own needs in years. More importantly, he discovered that caring for someone else, checking on Rose during the week, driving her to doctor's appointments, helping her organize her medications, gave him a sense of usefulness that he had been missing. For Rose, the friendship offered something equally valuable: the chance to maintain her dignity while receiving support. Kenny never treated her like a patient or made her feel diminished by her condition. Instead, he valued her opinions, her stories, her knowledge accumulated over a lifetime of caring for others. On her good days, Rose was sharp and funny, full of stories from her nursing career and insights about human nature that came from decades of observing people in crisis. On her difficult days, when the fog rolled in and she struggled to remember where she was or who Kenny was, he learned to be patient and gentle, guided by her own professional experience in caring for confused patients. "The person is still there," Rose had told him on one of her clear days. "Even when the words don't come or the memories hide, the person is still there. You just have to look deeper sometimes." 3 months into their friendship, Rose had what her doctor called a significant episode. Kenny found her sitting in her apartment, still in her nightgown at 3 in the afternoon, unsure of what day it was or why she felt so confused. She recognized Kenny but couldn't remember his name or how she knew him. "I'm scared," she whispered, as he helped her get dressed and organized her medications. "I don't know what's happening to me." Kenny sat beside her on the couch, holding her hand just as she had held his in the grocery store. "You're having a difficult day with your memory," he said gently. "But you're safe, and you're cared for. That's what matters right now." "Who are you?" she asked, her voice small and lost. "I'm your friend Kenny. We have dinner together every Sunday, and you help me remember how to take care of myself." Rose searched his face, looking for recognition that wouldn't come. But something in his voice or manner reassured her, and she relaxed slightly. "You have kind eyes," she said. "I think I can trust you." "You can," Kenny assured her. "Always." That evening, Kenny called Rose's daughter in California to discuss the situation. Linda was a busy executive with her own family, and while she loved her mother, the practical realities of caring for someone with advancing Alzheimer's were overwhelming from 3,000 miles away. "I've been looking into memory care facilities," Linda said, her voice tight with guilt and worry. "I know Mom wants to stay independent, but I'm terrified that something will happen to her when no one's around." Kenny understood Linda's concerns, but he also understood Rose's desire to maintain her autonomy for as long as possible. "What if she didn't have to be alone?" he suggested. "What if someone was looking out for her regularly?" "Mr. Rogers, I appreciate everything you've done for Mom, but you're not a professional caregiver. This disease is only going to get worse, and the responsibility—" "I know it's a big responsibility," Kenny interrupted gently. "But I also know your mother. She's helped me more than I can tell you, and I'd like to help her now." Over the following weeks, Kenny, Linda, and Rose's medical team worked out an arrangement that would allow Rose to remain in her apartment while receiving increased support. Kenny would check on her daily, help with meals and medications, and be available for emergencies. A professional caregiver would visit 3 times a week for more specialized care, and Linda would visit more frequently to assess the situation. The arrangement wasn't perfect. Rose continued to have difficult days, and there were moments when Kenny questioned whether he was equipped to handle the challenges of caring for someone with dementia. But there were also moments of profound connection and joy that reminded him why this friendship mattered so much to both of them. 6 months after their first meeting, on a clear spring morning when Rose was having one of her good days, she asked Kenny to drive her to the cemetery where Harold was buried. They sat on a bench near his grave, surrounded by dogwood trees in full bloom. "I want to tell you something while I can still say it clearly," Rose said, her voice steady and purposeful. "These months with you have been a gift I never expected. When I was first diagnosed, I thought my life was essentially over, that I would just be waiting for the disease to take everything away from me." Kenny started to speak, but Rose held up her hand. "Let me finish, dear. What I discovered is that even when you're losing pieces of yourself, you can still find new ways to matter, new ways to connect with people. You gave me that opportunity. Rose, you've given me just as much." "We've given each other what we needed," she agreed. "But I want you to understand something important. There will come a time, probably sooner than either of us wants, when I won't remember you or our friendship. When that happens, I don't want you to think it means our connection wasn't real or important." Kenny felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "I won't think that." "Good. Because love and friendship aren't just stored in memory. They change us at a deeper level. And those changes remain even when the specific memories fade." Rose took his hand. "You've made me feel useful and valued during a time when I could easily have felt worthless. That's changed me in ways that Alzheimer's can't touch." "You've changed me too," Kenny said quietly. "You've reminded me that getting older doesn't mean becoming irrelevant, that we can still matter to each other in profound ways." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the spring wind rustle through the dogwood blossoms. Kenny thought about the strange journey that had brought them together, his fainting spell in a grocery store, her moment of clarity in the midst of cognitive decline, the way two lonely people had found exactly what they needed in each other. Rose's prediction proved accurate. As her condition progressed, she had more bad days than good ones, and eventually she didn't recognize Kenny at all. But he continued to visit her, whether she was in her apartment or, eventually, in the memory care facility that became necessary when her care needs exceeded what he could provide. On her clear days, they would talk about music and movies and the changing seasons. On her confused days, he would simply sit with her, holding her hand and providing the calm presence that she had once provided for him. These moments taught Kenny something profound about the nature of love, that it doesn't require recognition or reciprocation to be meaningful. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is our presence, our willingness to be with them in their darkness, without trying to fix or change anything. Kenny also began volunteering at the memory care facility, reading to residents and organizing music programs that seemed to reach people even when words couldn't. He discovered that his background in music was particularly valuable. Familiar songs could sometimes unlock memories and emotions that conversation couldn't access. The facility's activities director, a compassionate woman named Sarah, became his collaborator in creating programs that brought joy to people who had seemed unreachable. "Music lives in a different part of the brain," one of the facility's doctors explained to Kenny during one of their regular meetings. "It's often the last thing to go, and sometimes it can serve as a bridge to other memories. What you're doing here isn't just entertainment. It's therapy in the truest sense." Kenny found this to be profoundly true in his work with the residents. A woman named Dorothy, who couldn't remember her children's names or recognize their faces when they visited, would light up when he played Moon River, singing along with perfect recall of every word, her voice strong and clear as if the years of confusion had never touched her. A man named Frank, who sat in confused silence most days, staring out the window with vacant eyes, would tap his feet and smile when Kenny played old country standards, sometimes even humming along in a voice that carried echoes of the man he used to be. There was Margaret, a former school teacher who would become agitated and fearful during most activities, but who would sit perfectly still and attentive when Kenny read poetry aloud, her lips sometimes moving silently as she recited verses she had memorized decades earlier. And Robert, a retired mechanic who rarely spoke anymore, would begin sharing stories about his work when Kenny played songs from the 1950s, his technical expertise and pride in his craft emerging clearly even when other memories remained locked away. Rose responded to music as well, in ways that both comforted and broke Kenny's heart. Even in her final stages when she rarely spoke and didn't seem to recognize anyone, not Linda when she visited from California, not the nurses who cared for her daily, not even Kenny himself, she would sometimes hum along when Kenny played gentle melodies on the guitar he brought to her room. Her voice was barely audible, but it was unmistakably there, a thread connecting the woman she had been to the woman she was becoming. "She knows that song," one of the nurses, a patient young woman named Patricia, told him after observing Rose's response to Amazing Grace. "Maybe not consciously, but some part of her remembers. Some part of her is still Rose, still the nurse who knew how to comfort people in distress." These observations led Kenny to develop what became known as the Memory Music Program, a structured approach to using familiar songs to connect with dementia patients. He worked with music therapists and neurologists to understand how different types of music affected different stages of cognitive decline. They discovered that hymns and lullabies often reached people even in advanced stages, while songs from adolescence and early adulthood could sometimes trigger remarkably clear memories in people who seemed otherwise unreachable. The program expanded beyond Rose's facility to other memory care centers in the region. Kenny trained volunteers in the techniques he had learned, teaching them not just to play music, but to observe carefully for signs of recognition, to create space for whatever responses emerged, and to honor the dignity of people whose minds were failing, but whose spirits remained intact. One of the most moving moments came during a session with a man named William, a former jazz musician who hadn't spoken in months. When Kenny played Take 5, William's fingers began moving on his wheelchair armrests, silently playing the complex bass line he had performed thousands of times in his younger days. His daughter, who had driven from 3 hours away to witness this, wept as she watched her father's hands remember what his mind had forgotten. "Dad taught me to play piano," she whispered to Kenny afterward. "I thought that part of him was gone forever." Kenny continued visiting Rose until her death 3 years after their first meeting. In her final weeks, she slept most of the time. But Kenny would still come and sit beside her bed, sometimes reading aloud from books she had mentioned loving, sometimes playing quiet music, sometimes just holding her hand and talking about the weather, the flowers blooming outside her window, the small daily miracles that continued even as she prepared to leave the world. The last time Rose opened her eyes and seemed to see him clearly was on a Tuesday afternoon in late spring. Kenny had been playing "You Are My Sunshine," a song she had once told him her mother used to sing to her as a child. Rose's eyes focused on his face, and for just a moment, recognition flickered there. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible but unmistakably present. "For everything." She died peacefully 2 days later, with Linda holding one hand and Kenny holding the other, surrounded by the staff who had cared for her and the volunteers who had become her extended family. The funeral was small but filled with people whose lives Rose had touched, former patients who remembered her kindness, colleagues who spoke of her dedication, and the new friends she had made in her final years, who understood that Alzheimer's had not diminished her essential goodness. At her funeral, Linda thanked Kenny for giving her mother dignity and friendship during the most difficult period of her life. "You saw her as a whole person when the rest of the world saw only her disease," Linda said, her voice thick with emotion. "You helped her remain herself until the very end." "Mom wrote you a letter," Linda said afterward, handing him an envelope that had been sealed with old-fashioned wax. "She gave it to me about a year ago, during one of her last really clear days. She said to give it to you after she was gone, and that you would understand when the time was right." Kenny waited until he was alone in his car to read Rose's final message, his hands trembling as he broke the seal. "Dear Kenny, if you're reading this, then my journey with Alzheimer's has reached its end, and I hope it was peaceful. I want you to know that our friendship was one of the most precious gifts of my life, a gift I never expected to receive and certainly never deserved. When we met in that grocery store, I was already beginning to feel like I was disappearing, becoming less myself with each passing day. The diagnosis had been like a death sentence, not of my body but of everything that made me who I was. I felt like I was already mourning myself, grieving for the person I was losing bit by bit. But in helping you and in letting you help me, I discovered that even as we lose pieces of ourselves, we can still create something beautiful with the pieces that remain. You showed me that my worth as a person wasn't tied to my ability to remember things, that I could still matter to someone even when my mind was failing. You showed me that aging and illness don't have to mean isolation, that we can still matter to each other even when our bodies and minds betray us. You gave me purpose when I thought I had none left, and dignity when I felt like I was losing everything that made me who I was. More than that, you gave me the chance to be useful again, to use the skills I had developed over decades of nursing. When I helped you in that store, when I knew exactly what to do to keep you calm and stable, I felt like myself again for the first time since my diagnosis. You gave me back my identity, even if it was just for those few precious minutes. I hope our friendship gave you something valuable as well. I hope it reminded you that you are needed and loved, that your life continues to have meaning and impact even as you face your own challenges with aging and loss. I hope I helped you understand that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's what connects us to each other. Please don't grieve for me too long. Instead, remember that what we shared continues in the kindness you show to others, in the understanding you've gained about the challenges of aging, in the compassion you've developed for people facing loss. Our friendship lives on in every life you touch, every person you help see their own worth. Find someone else who needs what you have to offer. The world is full of people who are struggling with loneliness, illness, and the fear of being forgotten. You have a gift for seeing their worth and helping them see it too. Use that gift as long as you can. I want you to know that some of my clearest, happiest memories from these difficult years are of our Sunday dinners, our conversations about music and life, the way you made me feel like I was still a person worth knowing. Those memories are what I hope to hold on to as long as possible. And if they fade, I trust that the love we shared will remain somehow, in ways I may not understand but can choose to believe in. Thank you for being my friend when I needed one most. Thank you for seeing me as Rose, not just as a patient or a problem to be managed. Thank you for helping me live with dignity and purpose until the very end. With all my love and gratitude, Rose P.S. There's a music box on my dresser that belonged to my mother. It plays Amazing Grace. I've asked Linda to give it to you. When you hear it, I hope you'll remember that love doesn't end with memory, and that some songs are strong enough to carry us home. Kenny sat in his car outside the funeral home, tears streaming down his face, understanding finally the full significance of their chance meeting. Rose had saved his life that day in the grocery store, not just from a fainting spell, but from the slow spiritual death of isolation and purposelessness. In return, he had given her the chance to remain herself, useful, valued, loved, even as Alzheimer's tried to steal her identity. But more than that, their friendship had taught him something profound about the nature of human connection, about how love can transcend the limitations of failing bodies and fading minds. Rose had shown him that a person's worth isn't diminished by illness, that dignity can be maintained even in the face of devastating loss, and that the heart remembers what the mind forgets. Following Rose's suggestion, Kenny began volunteering more extensively with organizations that served elderly and isolated people. He started a program pairing younger seniors with older ones facing health challenges, creating the kind of mutually beneficial relationships he and Rose had shared. The idea was simple but revolutionary. Instead of viewing caregiving as a one-way relationship where one person helps another, why not create partnerships where both people gave and received according to their abilities? Everyone has something to give, he would tell people interested in the program. Sometimes the person who seems to need the most help is actually the one who has the most to offer. Rose taught me that wisdom and compassion don't disappear just because someone's memory does. The program, which he named the Rose Project in honor of his friend, grew to serve hundreds of people across multiple states. Participants found that helping others not only provided practical benefits, but also restored their sense of purpose and connection. A retired teacher with mobility issues might be paired with a former construction worker experiencing mild cognitive decline. She could help him organize his medications and appointments, while he could assist with household repairs and maintenance that were beyond her physical capabilities. The partnerships often became deep friendships that enriched both lives in unexpected ways. Maria, a former social worker dealing with depression after her husband's death, was paired with Frank, a retired farmer whose Alzheimer's was progressing slowly. Maria helped Frank maintain his independence by organizing his daily routines, while Frank's gentle presence and simple wisdom helped Maria rediscover joy in small pleasures like tending the garden they planted together. Kenny continued to tell the story of his friendship with Rose, speaking at medical conferences, senior centers, and caregiver support groups. He emphasized the importance of seeing people with dementia as complete human beings whose worth wasn't diminished by their condition. His presentations always included recordings of the music sessions at the memory care facility, demonstrating how songs could reach people when nothing else could. Rose taught me that Alzheimer's might take memories, but it can't take away the fundamental goodness of a person, he would say. She was still herself, kind, wise, caring, even when she couldn't remember my name. That's who she was at her core, and disease couldn't change that. These presentations led to invitations to speak at national conferences on aging and dementia care. Kenny became an advocate for person-centered care that honored the dignity and humanity of people with cognitive decline. He worked with policymakers to improve funding for music therapy programs and with healthcare providers to implement more compassionate approaches to dementia care. Years later, when Kenny himself began to show early signs of cognitive decline, he faced the diagnosis with less fear than he might have otherwise. Rose had shown him that it was possible to live with dignity even in the face of memory loss, that love and connection could transcend the limitations of failing minds. The day before Kenny passed away in 2020, his son found him looking through a photo album that contained pictures of Rose and other friends he had made through his volunteer work. Despite his own memory problems, Kenny seemed to remember them all clearly, his face lighting up as he pointed to each photograph and shared a story about the person in it. "Dad, who are these people?" his son asked, settling into the chair beside Kenny's bed. Kenny smiled, his eyes clear despite his condition. "They're the ones who taught me that we're never too old to help each other, never too sick to matter, never too lost to be found by love. He turned to a picture of Rose taken during one of their Sunday dinners, her face bright with laughter as she told a story about her nursing days. "This is Rose," Kenny said softly. "She saved my life in a grocery store, and then I got to save hers right back. We took care of each other until the very end." The Rose Project continued after Kenny's death, now serving thousands of people who might otherwise face aging and illness in isolation. Each partnership created echoed the simple truth that Rose and Kenny had discovered, that our greatest strength often lies not in our independence, but in our willingness to depend on each other, to give and receive care with equal grace. In the end, Kenny Rogers learned that the most profound rescue isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as one person helping another remember their worth, one friend sitting quietly with another during their darkest moments, one human being choosing to see past illness and frailty to the enduring spirit within. The woman with Alzheimer's had indeed done the impossible. She had saved not just Kenny's life, but his understanding of what it means to live with purpose and connection until the very end. And in accepting her help, he had given her the same gift: the knowledge that she mattered, that her skills and compassion were still needed, that even as memory faded, love remained stronger than forgetting, deeper than disease, more enduring than death itself.